But the question to be answered is why the American people do not understand what all of the symbols on the back of the dollar bill mean. Probably less than 1 out of 100 citizens of America could explain the meaning of the pyramid, the eye, the eagle, or the Latin phrases. So all of these symbols are concealed because those who founded this nation were concealing a truth from the American people. And the reason they concealed it is because that truth is so evil that if the American people knew what it was, the conspirators would not be allowed to bring it into fruition. End of part 1. Please hold for part 2. Part 2 of 4. Now let me examine the symbols in the Great Seal of the United States. First then, it becomes important to define the Latin phrases shown on the reverse side. The phrase annuit coeptus means announcing, coeptus means the conception of or the birth of. The second phrase is novus ordo seclorum, and it means novus, new, ordo, order, seclorum, secular, meaning world. So the phrase means the New World Order. So the Latin phrases on this side of the Great Seal are translated to mean announcing the birth of the New World Order. And this was incorporated in the Great Seal in 1782. The pyramid is another symbol, and it too has a hidden meaning. The student must question why the founding fathers in America even put a pyramid in the Great Seal at all, because there are no stone pyramids in the United States. Also notice that the American pyramid is smooth on all sides. This is a photograph of a pyramid in Latin America. Notice that it is stepped, meaning the line on each side is broken by steps constructed out of bricks or stone. But notice one thing, twice each year the sun rises in such a way as to shine only on the wall on one side of the stairway, revealing a snake of 6 segments, with the 7th being its head, coming down to earth from the top of the pyramid. And notice that the head of the snake has an open mouth, a symbol meaning the snake is speaking to the people, revealing a previously unknown truth to them. This is a book entitled Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids, written by Peter Tompkins. And this is the close-up of the snake's head on the ground in front of another of the stone pyramids. Notice once again that its mouth is open. It would seem that the pyramid builders in Mexico believed that their god, the serpent, lived in the house on top of the pyramid and came to visit Earth twice a year to speak to them. Now these are the 3 most photographed pyramids in Egypt, and even though they appear to be stepped, they were constructed with smooth sides, and many of these smooth stones were removed during the early years for construction of the city of Cairo. You can still see some of the facing stones on the top of the pyramid in the center. So there must be, and is, another reason for the Founding Fathers to place a drawing of a pyramid in the Great Seal. Manly P. Hall discussed the pyramid in the Great Seal as being a model of the Great Pyramid of Giza near Cairo, Egypt. He wrote this on page 178 of his book entitled The Secret Destiny of America. Here, on the reverse side, is represented the Great Pyramid of Giza. This is perhaps the one that is featured the most of all of the pyramids in Egypt. It is the one with the secret passageways inside that lead to what Egyptologists call the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and a room beneath the ground level underneath the pyramid called the subterranean chamber or room. It is commonly believed that the pyramid was built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu and his wife, but Mr. Hall believes that this belief is not correct. He wrote in The Secret Teachings of All Ages, the theory advanced by Herodotus, the father of history, and was born in approximately 485 BC and died in approximately 425 BC, and now generally accepted that the pyramid was the tomb of the pharaoh, cannot be substantiated. He then wrote about why he believed the pyramid was constructed. Hall wrote, the pyramid and the all-seeing eye represent the universal house. Notice that he said the pyramid was a house, meaning it is a place for a god to reside. Continuing, he went on, surmounted by the radiant emblem of the great architect of the universe, meaning the eye inside the triangle. So Mr. Hall is informing his readers that the pyramid was not built as a tomb, but was constructed as a house for a god to live in. And he named that god as being the great architect of the universe. I will discuss the identity of that god a little later. This is Albert Pike, the leader of the worldwide Masonic movement from 1859 to 1891, perhaps the greatest Mason of all time. He added one more piece of the puzzle when he told his readers in his book entitled Morals and Dogma that there was another important understanding of the pyramid. This book was published in 1871 by the Masons and is probably the most important book they've ever published. He wrote this on page 460 of that book. The pyramid was erected in honor of the sun. So Mr. Pike was stating that the pyramid had some connection with a worship of the sun as a god. And Mr. Hall added another ingredient to the puzzle. He said the pyramid was used to initiate men into a worship of this hidden sun god. He wrote this. The initiation took place in one of the subterranean halls of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Through the majestic passageways and chambers of the Great Pyramid, past the illumined of antiquity, meaning those illuminated by the initiation. They entered its portals as men. They came forth as gods. Now, I would like to suspend the discussion of the Great Seal of the United States for a related subject, one that I believe I was the first historian to publish on. This discussion is extremely relevant to the general subject of America's secret destiny, as I am hoping you will see. I want to briefly show you some evidence that these initiates are all over the world, and that one of the ways you can identify an initiate is by a sign called the lion's paw, which is a sign indicating that the person giving the sign has been born again to the ancient mystery religion. And not just to the ancient mystery religion, but to the God of the ancient mystery religion, Lucifer, also called Satan, the devil. This is an Egyptian hieroglyph of a pharaoh being prepared for eternal life on a table representing a lion. You will see the lion's head on the left of the table and the tail on the right. The lion is an Egyptian symbol of eternal life. Here is another Egyptian drawing showing someone in a lion's head kneeling by the corpse of someone. I presume the X on his chest means the individual is dead. Notice again that the lion is holding an ankh, a symbol of eternal life. This is the drawing that Mr. Hall said showed a, quote, lion's paw in the Pyramid Mysteries. This drawing was put into his book entitled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. It shows the man being raised by the lion's paw. This drawing shows that in his case, the man, not the lion, is the ankh. In his case, he's got it in his hand rather, meaning that he's being raised up into eternal life through the lion's paw. In other words, of the Masons, they say that the ceremony raises up the initiate to the ancient mystery religion, meaning he has, quote, been born again, end quote, to the God of the ancient mystery religion. Let me say this now, and as I will continue to prove, that the God of the ancient mystery religion is Lucifer, also called Satan, the devil. As you know, the Christians say that after the Christian is baptized, he is said to be born again to the God of the Bible. And here the Masons are saying that the initiate is said to be born again to the God of the ancient mystery religion. So may I recommend that whenever you hear someone say they are born again, ask them to whom they are born again to. As we just saw, it is possible to be born again to Lucifer or to be born again to Jesus. This is a statue of Khufu, also called Cheops, the Greek name for Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. This is the earliest use of the symbol that I found. Notice the position of Khufu's right hand. That sign is called the lion's paw. This is the statue of Khufu's high priest Kal. The article accompanying the photograph said that he served all three pharaohs who built pyramids on the Giza Plateau. This is a drawing of Napoleon. I have read where some historians think that he was a member of the Illuminati, but establishing that fact has been difficult. Notice here that he is shown concealing the lion's paw under his coat. We will see this particular form of the sign concealed inside his coat in the photographs of other Luciferians. This is Anton LaVey, a Satanist and the founder of the Church of Satan. This is Annie Besant, the only woman I found so far that is giving the same lion's paw. She was an admitted Luciferian. This is a photocopy of a page from Captain William Morgan's book on the rituals of the Masons. Here is a Mason on the right side of the page giving what they call the sign of a fellow craft, but it's actually the lion's paw. This is the photograph of Lieutenant Elisha Hunt Rhodes, a Mason during the Civil War. I found his picture in a book about Freemasonry at Gettysburg. Notice that he is also giving the sign underneath his coat, just like Napoleon was. This is a photograph of Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism. Marx became a Satanist while at college, and he was a member of the Illuminati. This is Nikolai Lenin, the brutal Russian communist dictator who started the Communist Revolution in Russia in 1917. This is a statue of Joseph Stalin, the brutal dictator of Communist Russia. He's giving the sign halfway in and halfway out of his coat. And this is a photograph taken off of the internet of him giving the same sign. So the statue is based upon real life. Lenin and Stalin together murdered 40 million Russians in that communist revolution in the early 20th century. And they both were involved as having been born again to Lucifer, Satan, the devil. Isn't it an interesting coincidence that both these men were dedicated Luciferians? This is John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of President Abraham Lincoln. Booth was a Knights Templar Mason, which is a branch of the overall Masonic Lodge, and the sign he is giving, I believe, is the sign of the Knights of the Golden Circle, a 14,000-member secret society formed prior to the Civil War. In fact, this group was formed in 1837 in Europe, and they were the organization that planned the Civil War 24 years before it started. The sign is the sign is very similar to the lion's paw, and the reason it might be is because there were members of the Knights who were also members of the Masons. This is a photograph of Jesse James, the famous outlaw, on the left, and his brother Frank James on the right. Notice that Frank is giving the lion's paw sign because he was a member of the Masons. The sign being given by Jesse is, I believe, the sign of the Knights of the Golden Circle because it is known that Jesse was a member. By the way, Jesse James later became a 33rd degree Mason. This small photograph is of Alan Pinkerton, the head of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. He was giving a sign that shows that he was a member of the Masonic Lodge. Mr. Pinkerton was hired to capture Jesse and Frank James, but he never accomplished that goal, and I think the reason he didn't is because he knew that Jesse and Frank were Masons, and Masons take an oath to protect their brothers. This is Bloody Bill Anderson, a lieutenant in Quantrell's Raiders during the Civil War. He's giving a sign showing that he was a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. This man led murders into attacking individuals and families during the Civil War. It has been claimed that Jesse James rode with him during that time. And I would suggest that this is where Jesse learned about the Knights of the Golden Circle. He must have learned about the Masons from his brother Frank, who was already a member by the time of the Civil War. This is Salmon P. Chase, the Secretary of the Treasury in President Lincoln's cabinet and a member of the Masons. He is the individual after whom the Chase Manhattan Banks are named. Many believe that the Chase Manhattan Banks are owned in Maine by the Rockefeller family, and they have been supporters of the Illuminati conspiracy for generations. I have two more to show you, and they are real eye-openers. So get ready, because I believe that you will find these two pictures to be very disturbing. This is the February 17, 1986 cover of Time magazine, and as you can see, it shows a picture of the television evangelist Pat Robertson clearly giving the lion's paw sign on his chest. I want you to particularly notice the grin on Mr. Robertson's face. It appears to be the smile of someone who knows the secret and knows that he cannot tell us. And now we know what that secret is. If Pat knew what this sign meant, he is a Luciferian, not a Christian. And the reason he is grinning could be that he knows what he is doing and that we do not know. And on the chance that you find that a little harsh, ask yourself why he was photographed giving this particular sign. Let us presume for a moment that he was asked by the photographer to assume this particular pose and didn't know what the sign meant. How many photographs in the world do you think show someone giving this particular pose? I have been looking for pictures of this sign for probably 20 years, and I have found but maybe 25 of them. One would presume that Mr. Robertson would have asked the photographer why he wanted him to stand this way. It is further presumed that most people being asked to pose this way would not do so, simply because they did not understand what it represented. It certainly isn't a normal way to stand, whether for a photograph or not. So what was the reason that Pat agreed to stand this way? I do not know, except I suspect that it was his way of telling those in the world who saw the photograph and knew what the sign meant that he was one of them, a Luciferian. It might be remembered that Pat was running for the presidency of the United States in 1986, and this was his way of informing others that he was under their control because he was one of them. This is the only thing that makes sense. A Christian minister, Dr. David Weber, who ran the Southwest Radio Church, was a fellow member of a group of Christians who broadcast radio and television programs on America's airwaves. He reported on his radio program that he took this Time magazine cover of Pat giving the sign and asked him directly why he was photographed that way. And according to Dr. Weber, Pat responded, "I fell off my horse and injured my arm. If you believe that, I will sell you my shares in the Brooklyn Bridge." And the final photograph is not a photograph, but a portrait of President George Washington. I must admit that it is a portrait and not a photograph because there were no cameras when Washington lived, so no one can certify that he posed for this portrait. But that statement begs the question. Because this is an official portrait of Washington released by the George Washington Masonic National Memorial Association. This is their building in Washington, D.C. So even if Washington did not pose for this portrait, why would the Masons release it as an official portrait of him? The only explanation that makes sense is that the Masons are using the portrait to inform those who are born again to Lucifer that George Washington was as well. Now I'd like to get back to our study of America's secret destiny. The Masons, the Order of the Quest, and the Illuminati were directly involved in a belief in an ancient mystery religion. Albert Pike wrote on page 624 of his book entitled Morals and Dogma, "Masonry is identical with the ancient mysteries, and that is true. The ancient mystery religion is 6,000 years old and is found on every continent, in every culture, and in every religion." So now back to the issue. 23 of the 39 signers of the Constitution were members of the Masonic Lodge, and many, according to Manly P. Hall, were members of the Order of the Quest. Ben Franklin, a Mason and involved in the Order of the Quest, admitted that they used words to deceive. The symbols of the Great Seal of the United States that they designed are concealing hidden truths from the American people, and these were the men who formed the government of the United States. Now let me show you a way you can tell who designed the Great Seal of the United States. This is once again the front side of the seal showing the eagle. Notice that above the head of the eagle is a 6-pointed star made out of 13 5-pointed stars. This is a close-up of that symbol. This 6-pointed star is, of course, the Star of David, a symbol of the Jewish faith, but it is also a Masonic symbol. But the Masons are not a Jewish organization. They are non-denominational in that they allow each member to believe in whatever God he chooses to believe in. And I shall discuss that a little later in this series. And here is some of the evidence that it is a Masonic symbol. This is a photograph of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Freemasons in Maryland. And this is a close-up of the building to the right. And you will see 4 of the 8 or 9 6-pointed stars on the top of the building. But the Masons use the symbol as a sign of the Masons, and in all of my research I have never seen an explanation as to why it is one of their symbols. So I can only give you my opinion. The reason seems to be that they do so because of the hidden number 13 in the star itself. This is a drawing of the 6-pointed star, and it has, of course, 6 outer points. And this 6-pointed star illustrates the fact that there are a total of 7 shapes in the star, 6 triangles, and the 6-sided hexagon. Obviously, 6 plus 7 totals 13. I have drawn in the 6 lines to make up the 6-pointed star, and you will notice that it is made up of 2 triangles, one pointed down and one pointed up. Now we're going to transport these lines from the eagle side to the pyramid side of the Great Seal. And this is a slide showing you how it looks when you put the 6-pointed star down on the pyramid. Now notice that the triangle with the eye in it points to a blank space between the 2 words annuit and sceptus. But the other 5 points point to 5 letters. A at 10 o'clock, S at 2 o'clock, N at 8 o'clock, the second O in ordo at 6 o'clock, and M at 4 o'clock. These 6 letters, or 5 letters rather, are together A-S-N-O-M. There is a word in a dictionary that describes the scrambling of letters in a word to conceal the actual word. And that word is anagram. A-S-N-O-M is an anagram for M-A-S-O-N, the Masons. So it is clear, the Masons are the men who designed the Great Seal. The Masons hide things in plain sight. We all carry these dollars, and only a few in America know the secrets they contain. Now let me show you how the Masons legally grab more power in the Constitution than any dictator or tyrant in history. For years, the American people have been told that the American form of government, a constitutional republic, is the finest form ever devised by men, and that the American Constitution is the finest document ever written by the mind of man. And I used to believe that as well, until I discovered the fact that the Founding Fathers literally placed a phrase in our Constitution that they knew would later destroy the nation. Because as thousands of today's patriots have discovered when they have gone to the courts of America to argue the constitutionality of various laws and regulations, they've learned that the Constitution of the United States of America is null and void. There are no constitutional rights in the courts of the United States today. And the reason that is so is because this nation's founding fathers set it up so that our God-given unalienable rights would no longer be rights, but would be privileges granted by government. And the reason they did that was because they were members of the Masons, the Illuminati, or the Order of the Quest, or any combination of these groups. To prove that the Constitution is null and void in America today, we must go back to the year of 1776, when the Founding Fathers declared this nation's independence from Great Britain. The Declaration of Independence was just that. This nation was declaring its independence from the government of Great Britain. Those who wrote it were complaining about the tyranny being imposed upon the American people by King George, the King of England. And the proof of that is found in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We the people wrote, "The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations." The word usurpation is defined as the illegal seizure of sovereign power. The American people were reclaiming their sovereignty by declaring their own independence from the tyranny of the king. The word sovereignty is defined by a dictionary as being supreme in power. The word sovereign is defined as being unlimited by any other meaning any other person or government. The Declaration continues, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To understand what that means, it becomes important to define the word tyranny. Webster's 1828 dictionary, meaning the dictionary is close to the date of 1776 that is available, defines the word simply as absolute or unlimited power. So it is fair to conclude that the Founding Fathers felt that King George was creating a tyrannical government in America by stealing the sovereignty of the American people and replacing it with his own. And that was the reason they were breaking the bonds with the English government. So our Founding Fathers knew what the word tyranny meant, and to further prove that, the writers of the Constitution actually attempted to further define the word in the Declaration of Independence itself. They listed 30 specific evidences in the Declaration of the fact that King George was guilty of creating an oppressive totalitarian government, meaning a tyranny in the United States. The 22nd of these is the one that clearly addresses the issue. He, meaning King George, has given his assent to the suspending of our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. That is the key phrase in red. Legislate in all cases whatsoever. That is the very definition of tyranny. There are no limits to that grant of power. They were grabbing absolute, dictatorial, tyrannical power. There is no Magna Carta, no Bill of Rights, no Constitution to protect the rights of the people. It is absolute power. The Constitution was issued in 1787, 11 years after the Declaration. The following is from the preamble of the Constitution. We the people, notice the people, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. It was here that the crime of our Founding Fathers was first started, because the Founding Fathers actually created two separate governments inside the Constitution, and they gave one of them absolute tyrannical power. So they had to build a front in order to conceal their crime. Perhaps the best way I can illustrate what they did is to show you a theme park called Old Tucson, located outside of Tucson, Arizona. Here in 1939, in the desert outside of Tucson, the makers of the movie Arizona constructed a movie set out of adobe mud for the movie. It was later transformed into a theme park called Old Tucson. The owners have covered up many of the original mud adobe buildings with wood frame buildings that make the city look as if it had been built in the 1880s. Just as a point of non-important trivia, I've marked the spot with an X where actor and singer Dean Martin stood when he later got hit on the head in one of those John Wayne movies. Aren't you glad you watched this presentation this far so you could learn that? Of course you are. Now, back to the presentation. As long as you walk down the main street of the park, the buildings look real. But many of these buildings are nothing more than a front, with no side, floor, or roof, but they give the appearance from the front of being a complete building. Take, for instance, this church building, because this is the front view. And this is the back view. And there is no building, but from the front, it looks like a complete building. As long as you look at the Constitution without really examining it, we see the magnificence of the document. But if you look behind the words, as we are going to do in a minute, you will find that it is all a false front, just like some of the buildings in Old Tucson. The Founding Fathers built a set like Old Tucson around the Constitution. We see the false front and think that is the Constitution. But those who walk around back and see the false back of the document know that We have bought some more fire engines and other grain. The Founding Fathers had to construct this elaborate facade so that anyone who read the Constitution would see the aged man and his reflection and not the demon God. They were to see the power being divided, not the power being centralized. And because of this, we the people have missed the fatal flaw, the one that was intentionally placed in the Constitution so that it would later destroy the very rights it was intended to protect. It is my opinion now that the Constitution is the most oppressive document ever written by the mind of man. Article 1 of the Constitution created the legislative branch. Article 2 created the executive branch. And Article 3 created the judicial branch. We've been told that this was to divide the power and not give too much power to any one branch of the government. And it is in Article 1 and Section 8 that grants the legislative branch 18 specific powers, and these are listed one after the other. This reads in part, Congress shall have power to collect taxes, to coin money, to establish post offices, to declare war, for instance. Now I must commend the Founding Fathers for their amazing insight into the future. They had the foresight to predict that universities would one day field football teams, and that they would form associations to regulate all of their sports activities, including the scheduling of bowl games. This is an article in the Arizona Daily Star on December the 10th, 2009, in which a House subcommittee approved legislation aimed at forcing college football to switch to a playoff system to determine its national champion. I simply cannot understand how our Founding Fathers could have envisioned such a thing as a national championship football game in 1787. But certainly they must have, because Congress believes it has the delegated power to force the colleges to change their own procedures in declaring a national champion football team. And on a second review of all the 18 powers granted to Congress, I found this. Congress shall have the power to require universities who field a football team to switch to a playoff system to determine a national champion. Because the powers delegated in the Constitution are very specific, meaning that our Founding Fathers gave Congress these and only these powers. So if Congress feels they have this power, they must have it. Because congressmen and congresswomen take oaths to protect and defend the Constitution. And that means they must know what it gives them in the way of powers. Or so we have been told. But we have been lied to. So I made that power up. So we must find another source for the power to do this. And there is a power to force the football universities that play football to schedule a different playoff system. And this is what they wrote in part. It wrote in part in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, as they were granting powers to Congress. Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. Notice that the Founding Fathers used the very same phrase, the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever, that they used in the Declaration of Independence to define the tyrannical power of King George. They gave Congress the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. And that means they gave Congress tyrannical power. The Constitution was written only 11 years after the writing of the Declaration, and many of the people signing the Declaration also signed the Constitution. It is impossible not to conclude that the Founding Fathers gave Congress tyrannical power. They did so in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. So that means that Congress must know that they have the power to force the universities to switch to a playoff system. They must know that they have total, unlimited power. And that power was given to them by the Founding Fathers in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. The power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. If I had the power to time travel back to the year 1787, while the Founding Fathers discussed the writing of the Constitution of the United States, and suddenly appear, I would not be too kind, because I knew what they were doing to the future of this nation. I would tell them that I knew what sort of document they were going to write, and that I considered them to be contemptible traitors to the American people. Because what they did to the American people is one of the most disgusting treacheries in the history of mankind. Because they did not inform the American people just what they were doing, because they knew that if they did, they would never be allowed to do it. And now we know just what the future they envision for us is, and I must say it is not pleasant. Let me now get current and discuss why the Congress feels it has the power to create a health care system that is close to passing here in December of 2009. This is President Barack Obama at a campaign rally, and the slogan behind him reads, "Change we can believe in." One of the changes he was campaigning for was a call to remake this nation's health care system. So the question is, where is the delegated power to do such a thing? Is there such a delegated power in the listing of the specific powers in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution? And any fair reading of those powers does not reveal any such delegated powers. But they do have this power. It is listed in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Congress shall have the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. Now, it is important to notice that the writers of the Constitution did restrict that tyrannical power to just one place, Washington, D.C. They wrote, Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district as may become the seat of the government of the United States, meaning Washington, D.C. So the original intent was to limit this tyrannical power to the seat of the government of the United States, shown here by the map. It is also important to recall that the Constitution was written by the people of the United States of America. So they wrote about both the United States and the United States of America. This tyrannical power was intended to be extended only over the 10 miles square of Washington, D.C. They have limited power in the United States of America. That means that there are two constitutional governments in America, the United States of America and the United States. But the story of how this power has spread all over the remainder of the United States is very interesting. There was not much concern with the tyrannical government of the United States until the 13th and 14th Amendments were passed in 1865 and 1868 after the Civil War. Let's examine the 13th Amendment first. It reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, shall exist within the United States." Now, slavery is a situation where one person has lost his freedom to another. A synonym of slavery is involuntary servitude, meaning when a person is forced to serve another without the first person's consent. Involuntary means that the person does not want to do what he's being forced to do. But notice that by these two definitions, voluntary servitude is permissible. That means that we are free to voluntarily become a slave anytime we want. Only involuntary servitude is not permitted. If you want to become a slave, you are free to do so. Now, with that understanding, we can now discuss the 14th Amendment. That one reads, "All persons." Notice that the word is changed from people to persons. We now have to discuss the difference between a person and being a people. We used to be called people, and now we are called persons, and there is an important distinction between the two words. I will not spend a lot of time on this, but I will show you that there is a difference. People are sovereign, living under God-given rights. Persons are individuals living under government-granted privileges. I have to now define the two words right and privilege. A right is the ability to act morally without asking permission. A privilege is the ability to act morally, but only after permission has been granted. When a person is sovereign, he does not need to ask permission to morally make his decisions on how he runs his life. So the 13th Amendment makes voluntary servitude permissible. So we have lost our sovereignty under this new word, persons. A sovereign would be a free man whose rights were God-given and unalienable, which means that only the grantor can take them away. Rights are granted by God, and only God can take them away. No government, no majority, no minority, no one can take them away. But more importantly, a privilege is not unalienable. It can be taken away by the person or entity granting it. Now let's go back to the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. If we were declared to be citizens of the United States after the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868, what were we before the 14th Amendment? We were citizens of a particular state of the Union, and only that. You were a citizen of the state in which you were born or where you were residing after birth. You were a citizen of Arizona if you were born in Tucson. But notice that in the 14th Amendment, there are two ways to become a citizen of the United States, meaning a citizen of the tyrannical government of Washington run by Congress. You can be born in Washington, D.C., or you can become naturalized in Washington, D.C., meaning the United States. A naturalized citizen is one who is voluntarily asked to become a citizen. For example, A citizen of France leaves his country and comes to the United States. He wishes to become a naturalized citizen, one who voluntarily renounces his citizenship in another country to become a citizen of the second country. So once you are acknowledged as a citizen of the United States, you must agree to their jurisdiction over your person. They were sovereign people who had no master, who lived by right. We are now citizens of the United States who live by privilege. Actually, the 14th Amendment affords you dual citizenship. It continues. All persons born or naturalized are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So the citizens of the United States have dual citizenship. They are citizens of Washington, D.C., and they are citizens of the state wherein they reside. That means that the 14th Amendment did not eliminate the citizenship of the state citizen. It added the citizenship of Washington, D.C. So the question is, how did we become a citizen of the United States? If we were not born in Washington, D.C., and if we did not voluntarily become a naturalized citizen of the United States. Those who wrote the 13th and 14th Amendments needed us to volunteer to become U.S. citizens, to trade our rights for government-granted privileges. They had to trick us. And they tricked us into becoming a naturalized citizen of the United States. And then they could claim that we had voluntarily volunteered to be a servant of the U.S. government. So we were tricked into buying some other grain and a fire engine. Benjamin Franklin told us they would deceive us with words. We were not told that we did this when we voluntarily asked for the Socialist Security Card issued by the government of the United States. The American people have been told that they were required to obtain this card. But there are experts in federal law that can find no such law passed by Congress requiring them to do so. So that means that the American people voluntarily signed up for the card and the Socialist Security benefits. And when they did, they became a naturalized citizen of the United States and therefore became subject to the jurisdiction of the tyrannical government. And the reason we did this was because we believed we had to. But there is no law requiring anyone to obtain a Socialist Security card. It is also important to point out that those who have done the research into this problem have discovered that there is no law requiring the citizens of the various states of the Union to pay federal income taxes either. But understand, so far this is not proof, it's only research. Because it is my opinion that there will never be a test case where a jury finds that the income tax is illegal, because it can be assumed that the government would not want to make that truth known to the American people. I am a self-employed writer who does not have an employer, and since I have no salary, I cannot deduct taxes from a payroll. So I must make an estimated tax payment each quarter to the Internal Revenue System. And I do this on a tax form number 1040 ES. There is a paragraph in the printed instructions that reads, "Who must make estimated tax payments?" These rules apply to U.S. citizens. Notice that the IRS says that these rules are rules and not laws. And secondly, notice that these rules apply to U.S. citizens. That must mean that if you are not a naturalized citizen of the United States, nor born in Washington, D.C., these rules do not apply to you, because only U.S. citizens must pay the income tax. Notice that I am not saying that you should stop paying income taxes. I'm saying that it appears as if the income tax must be paid by those who have voluntarily become a naturalized citizen of the United States by applying for a Socialist Security card. Let me just repeat what Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 authorizes Congress to do. Congress shall have the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. And that is unlimited power. They have the power to enforce law where there is no law. Everything that Congress is doing today is constitutional. Remember, I will repeat it. They have unlimited power, and it was given to them by our founding fathers. And who were our founding fathers? They were members of the Masonic Lodge, the Order of the Quest, and or the Illuminati. Let me add the final piece of the puzzle to convince you that I'm right. The 10th Amendment reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states or to the people." That means that if the Constitution did not specifically list the power in Article 1, Section 8, Congress does not have the power. That means the power has to be specifically delegated, and if it is not specifically delegated, the Congress does not have the power. End of Part 2. Please go to disc number 2 for Part 3. America's Secret Destiny, Part 3 of 4. This is James Madison, the 4th President of the United States. He has been called the father of the Constitution during the deliberations on this document. He, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, were asked to write a series of articles for a newspaper in New York City as an effort to explain the type of government they were creating. These essays have been published as the Federalist Papers so we can know what our founding fathers were thinking as they wrote the Constitution. And Mr. Madison discussed the delegated powers in Article 1, Section 8 with these words: "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state government are numerous and indefinite." So Madison was saying that the only powers the United States has are few and defined, meaning they have to be listed. And if they are not listed, the United States does not have them. And to put the final argument to Madison's position, I would like to quote the 10th Amendment to the Constitution once again. It reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states or the people." So Congress only has delegated powers, or in the words of James Madison, these powers are few and defined. But Congress has funded the following items: stem cell research, space capsules, Hubble space telescopes, and trips to the moon, amongst other things. Where is the delegated power to do each of these things? If the Constitution does not specifically say Congress shall have the power to tax the people for stem cell research, Congress does not have the power to fund stem cell research. How could the Founding Fathers ever conceived of such a thing as stem cell research back in 1787? And the answer is that they couldn't, and if they couldn't, they didn't. And if they didn't, then Congress doesn't. But Congress has. So that means that Congress must know that they have unlimited power. They must know they have the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. So they must know that they should never tell the American people they have this unlimited power.